What's up guys, Zaxby Sauce aka confusednsurgent here, and welcome back to another episode of Hardware Help. A little house cleaning before we start. First of all, there is another video card giveaway on this episode. Now, I will be giving away this GTX 950, which is an EVGA GTX 950 with the ACX 2.0 cooler. You can see how awesome that cooler is. It does require an 8-pin PCIe power connector right there. So if your system cannot handle that, please don't enter if you can't actually use the card. Please make sure this goes to someone that can and will use it, preferably for gaming, but well, really, that's about it. I mean, it's not really good for anything else. Yes, it will play Paint, Solitaire, Spider Solitaire even, or Mahjong, all of the above with a plum, but it's really made for like actual 3D gaming from relatively modern titles. So if that's your plan, man, and you can support the 8-pin PCIe power connector, then do please enter. Also keep in mind that even if you don't have the 8-pin connector, you can get adapters online. So if your power supply is fairly beefy in the 500-ish plus watt range, just to be safe, you could probably pull it off with 400. This card doesn't draw a lot of power, but regardless, 500 and above is safe. If it's in that range and it doesn't have the PCIe power connector, you can get it like a SATA to PCIe adapter or a Molex to PCIe adapter, and you should be perfectly fine. I haven't decided yet what method I'm going to use to do this giveaway. Probably going to be Gleam. I've been having some problems with people entering multiple times as the same person. So they use different emails and enter the contest multiple times, which screws over the people that only enter once, as obviously you should. One entry per person. So I'm saying this now, even though it hasn't been stated in the past, because I thought it was common sense. One entry per person. If I find out that you've entered multiple times, however that may be, I will disqualify your entire entry. And if you do that multiple times, I'm just going to disqualify you from every entry, every giveaway going forward. So do keep in mind, one entry per person. Gracias. That being said, this 950, check the description down below for how to win this puppy. So it's going to somebody. Somebody's going to win it. Guaranteed. And we have several winners in the past that can vouch for the fact that they get the video card that's on your screen currently is going to be in one of my viewers' hands. That has happened like 5 or 6 times now. So bingo. That being said, some other house cleaning items. I have been on a small hiatus for about a week now, getting content together, getting ideas for videos together, trying to come up with a schedule for releases so I could get a more constant stream of content out to you guys, because I think that's going to be the best idea for growing the channel, helping you guys out, getting a good community going. I'm going to try to release videos every Sunday and Wednesday or Thursday. In the middle of the week, those times are kind of fluctuating because of work engagements and stuff, but I'm going to try to record a lot of content ahead of time and schedule it so that it will come out regardless, and then it gives me a little buffer room for when I have to go out of town for work and things like that, so family issues, etc. So that being said, look out for those release dates, Sunday, Wednesday, Thursday-ish, and if that changes, I will let you know either here or on Twitter. I keep doing this hand clap. That's probably loud on the mic. I'm going to try to cut that out since the mic is right there. Now, what we're doing today is overclocking. And we're going to go over what it is, pros and cons, and then how to do it. And the instructional that I'm going to do is on a Ryzen 3 2200G. It is the Ryzen that includes the Vega GPU on board. I believe it's a Vega 56, a much cut down Vega 56, but a Vega nonetheless. So that is on chip, and that does affect overclocking a little bit because there's a little extra heat generated by that unit, even if it's not in use. However, should be fine, and the overclocking principles that you're going to see for this particular chip and motherboard should apply to most chips and motherboards. So I'll go over how to overclock on my system, my test bench, which is over there. So I'll swing the camera around at some point so you can see that, and then we'll move on. So that being said, overclocking, and in this case, CPUs. So what is overclocking? When manufacturers release CPUs, they release them at a certain frequency, which is the speed at which the processor runs. This speed has to be guaranteed by the manufacturer to work in all scenarios and workloads that are conceivably possible. So even if we're talking about running the processor at 100% speed with the stock heatsink and fan for 1 year, it has to be able to cover that. So they do tons of testing and engineering work to make sure that these things are stable at the released speed. In order to make every single chip that leaves the line stable at its release speed, these speeds are down somewhat from the theoretical headroom that any particular chip might have. Now, each chip will have different headroom than its brothers and sisters, even its brothers and sisters on the same wafer, and that's called the silicon lottery. You may have heard people refer to that on various YouTube channels and internet review websites before. The silicon lottery is whenever you buy a chip, you're basically playing the lottery with the particular piece of silicon that the chip is made out of. And you may have a loser, a chip that doesn't overclock at all. You may have a free ticket, a chip that might get 100 or 200 megahertz, overclock, and you might have a jackpot chip that'll hit, the theoretical maximum that chip has ever hit. The jackpot chips are the ones that are used by your world record liquid nitrogen overclockers. They go through and select only the best chips that they could find in order to get the highest overclocks possible. So that's the silicon lottery. Now, why would you want to overclock? There's a couple reasons for that. You may want to extend the life of older hardware. Overclocking can make older hardware not equal to more modern hardware in most cases, but it can give it a little extra legs, a little extra breathing room for working with today's applications. So if you're running like an older Phenom 2 kind of system, one of the older AMD chips, or even one of the older Intel, like a Sandy Bridge or an Ivy Bridge, or even back to a Nehalem or a Core 2 Quad, if you're running one of those chips and you don't have the money, time, resources, whatnot to invest in a new system, which often require not only a new processor, but also new motherboards, new RAM. You basically have to replace the whole system these days to get a new processor. You can try overclocking in order to see if the workload you intend for the chip will work better, faster, and to an acceptable degree with just overclocking, which is free for the most part. You might have to replace the CPU cooler depending on what you have now, but other than that, that's about the only expense involved. So you can get a little extra life out of all your parts by overclocking various parts of them. The second thing is you may just want a increase in performance even if you have a brand new part. I basically always run all my parts overclocked, even as soon as I buy them. I have an i7 6700K that is in my computer over to the left, and it runs at 5.2 gigahertz 24/7, and it has since basically the day I got it. It has a Kraken X62 water cooling all-in-one unit on it, and it keeps it about 60 C under load, and it is perfectly happy and stable running at 5.2 gigahertz. That is a pretty good silicon lottery winner for 6700K, and it's 4-core 8-thread chip, and it's still perfect for everything I do with it. That being said, there are people that, you buy the 8700K, brand new, you're going to overclock it the day you get it. And like I said, there are certain workloads where that makes sense. And even if it's a brand new chip, you may want to have just that little extra bit of advantage by overclocking it. So that brings us to the downsides of overclocking. There are a couple there too. One, sometimes, and it's pretty rare, but your warranty can be voided by overclocking. And also, I say one, it's rare to have that in writing, that the warranty is voided by it, and two, it's difficult to prove that that's what you did. If you are taking if you're overclocking a chip, it's difficult to prove that that was the cause of the problem, or that it was even done to the chip in the first place. And then the second thing is it can permanently damage and or destroy your hardware. With CPUs in particular, so they have a protection in them called thermal throttling, and when and if the temperature of the processor gets too high, it reaches a maximum that it feels is unsafe, which is usually somewhere in between 90 and 100 Celsius. It will start to automatically reduce frequencies or speeds in order to bring heat output down. And regardless of how much you've overclocked it, it will, if it does reach those temperature limits, it will drop the speed until it feels it is safe to operate. And at a certain point, it will actually turn off the entire system if the thermal throttling can't be brought under control. The entire system has, most systems have thermal safety nets in place to basically power everything off and let the temps drop down just by the fact that no heat's being generated anymore because no electricity is flowing. So if either or both of those preventative measures fail, the chip can be permanently damaged by the temperatures, and in the case of overclocking, since you're usually using higher voltages, by the current that you're applying to the chip that may be at unsafe levels. So do keep that in mind. For instance, if you are applying voltages that are too high for the rated voltage handling of the chip, they can, over time, erode the pathways that the electricity flows down on the chip. And once these pathways are eroded enough, they actually can break the actual flow of electricity can break into different parts of the chip that it wasn't intended to go into, and then essentially you fried the chip. That's pretty rare, and it requires pretty extreme voltage overclock or just running at too high voltages for too long. But still, it can and does happen, so that's another thing you have to watch out for. This overclocking in general is not something to be taken lightly. If you do want to do it, it is easy to learn, difficult to master, and it does come with downsides and risks. So please keep that in mind. Before you do this on any of your own hardware, keep in mind that you can and do run the risk of losing the hardware entirely. So if you can afford that risk, go on. If you cannot afford that risk, I would recommend waiting and maybe just saving up your money for better hardware. So all that being said, let's move over to the test bench over here on my right, and let's take a look at some examples of overclocking the Ryzen 3. So I'll see you in just a moment. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to log into Windows, and we're going to get a baseline. We're going to basically get a baseline reading for how our processor performs as far as its general speed, its ability to perform tasks, and we're also going to see what kind of temperatures we get when it is under load. That way we can compare and contrast those to post overclocking, and also to make sure that we even have any thermal headroom in which to overclock right now. Obviously, if your processor is hitting its thermal max as it stands, one, that's not great. You should not be hitting thermal max even with stock cooling solutions. Most of the time that can generally mean you have other problems going on that could be like dust is built up, some of your fans might not be working, etc. And that's something you would want to investigate before moving any further. So what we're going to do here is we're going to do a few tools. One thing you're going to want, you see here, Cinebench R15. This is a very generic benchmarking tool for processors. And what it allows you to do is get a general feel for how your processor performs, not only against itself, so when you've overclocked it, you can see how much performance you've gained, but you can also compare and contrast against other processors, even different makes and models, so Intel versus AMD, etc., because Cinebench is going to do the same benchmark, and it's going to run roughly the same on all processors, and that's what they've over their multiple releases, they've really narrowed down the ability to compare and contrast the speed at which a processor can perform this task is directly comparable between even different generations and different manufacturers. Now, this only applies to this task. So if you can say my CPU can perform Cinebench at with a score of 1279, and this one is only 822. Well, that means this X5650 is going to be faster than the 4770K. No, that's not correct. This X5650 has a lot more cores, 12 cores, 24 threads, versus the 4 cores, 8 threads of this 4770K. In any task where the oodles of extra cores do not make a difference, the 4770K is going to wipe the floor with the 5650. It's just a much newer processor, much more efficient. So that is all that being said, we're here to see what our processor scores right now everything is at stock. I went ahead and loaded the optimized defaults on the BIOS. Everything is at stock. You can see over here on core temp, we are at a core temp of 27 degrees Celsius. I have a Cooler Master Hyper 212 Evo on there with 2 fans. It's overkill for this Ryzen 3 2200, but what are you going to do? So as you can see over here, processor Ryzen 3 2200G, 4 cores, 4 threads at 3.5 gigahertz. It thinks we're running at Windows 8 for some reason. We're actually on Windows 10 64-bit, but whatever. So that's not going to affect the score. So what we're going to do is I'm going to hit run, and then I'm going to bring core temp back up to the front while it runs so that we can see the score and the temperature as it goes up. So I'm going to hit run. Now, if you look here on core temp, immediately we've jumped up to 46 degrees Celsius, which is still awesome. That's still really low. Our TJ Max on this is not displayed because core temp doesn't know that what processor this is. As you can see, it says AMD processor BE. So core temp is not familiar with the new Ryzen, the Vega built-in Ryzen processors. That's not a big deal. TJ Max is 90 to 100C. That's when it's going to start throttling. So as you can see, we are well below TJ Max at 48 degrees Celsius. And TJ Max is basically the temperature at which the CPU will start throttling or reducing speeds in order to bring temps under control. So it's maximum safe temperatures that you are basically incapable of overriding. So when you hit those temp limits, the CPU will throttle and there's not anything you can do about it. So you want to try to stay below those. And they're there for a reason, because the CPU can do serious damage to itself at higher temperatures. So you can see CPU still running at 48 degrees Celsius. That seems to be bumped it up to 49. So we'll call it 49 degrees Celsius. And that leaves us with a score of 561. 3.5 gigahertz, we got a Cinebench score of 561 and a high temp of 49 Celsius. Although this says a max of 256 degrees Celsius. I don't know if you can see that there. That's not accurate. Not sure why that is there. That would be impressive. You know, 100C is boiling. For all you non-Americans out there, you are familiar with that. 212 Fahrenheit for us in Freedom USA. But 256C is pretty hot. Pretty hot. I don't think the processor ever hit that temp, but regardless. Core temp is not familiar with this proc, maybe needs an update or something like that, but it's alright. It's reading temps fine, so that's not a big deal. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to reboot the BIOS, and then I'll show you how to start the overclocking process. So I'll be back with you momentarily. So as you reboot, you're going to want to get into your computer's BIOS, which is basically the low-level software that controls everything the computer does. It's on a small read-only memory chip that is soldered onto your motherboard, and it's like I said, a very low-level operating system essentially. That controls all the very low-level functions of your computer. What you can do in the BIOS is tweak some of these functions, and some of them are overclocking options. Now, not all motherboards and not all processors support overclocking. Your mileage may vary depending on the model you have. However, this particular model of CPU and motherboard combined, by their powers combined, they do support motherboard or overclocking. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit advanced here, and again, this is going to vary based on the manufacturer of your motherboard, so on and so forth. You can see that this is a B350 Tomahawk made by MSI, and they have the advanced. Right now I'm in the easy mode, so I'm going to click advanced. You can see 3.5 gigahertz CPU temperatures here, motherboard temperature there. Hit advanced. Now on the MSI, you go to overclocking settings, and this will vary. These parts, though, are going to be pretty similar across all motherboards. In general, they may be named slightly different and they're going to be located in slightly different places, but in general, this is where you're going to start. So the first thing we're going to do is CPU ratio. This is the number by which the base clock is multiplied to give you your final frequency. So a base clock of 100 with a CPU ratio of 35 would give you 3500 megahertz or 3.5 gigahertz, which is the default. So I've changed it to 35, which is the default, off of auto. The next thing we're going to want to do is turn off the core performance boost. We do not want anything like turbo boost or XFR or anything like that to be turned on. We want the processor to always be running all cores at the specified CPU ratio. Now, graphics clock frequency, we're going to leave alone for this this section. This chip has a GPU built into it. That is not a usual scenario, so we're not going to go over that right now. And a DRAM frequency and all this jazz, we're going to leave alone. We are going to mess with core voltage at some point, but for right now, we're just going to bump up the ratio. So let's just go conservatively. Let's try, let's say 39. Give it a 400 megahertz overclock. So that's going to be at 3.9 gigahertz. We're not going to give it any more core voltage. Actually, you know what? For the sake of, normally I would leave it on auto, but for the sake of this, let's just go ahead and show you what's going to happen if we leave it alone. So let's say, I see it bumping up to 1.216, so let's go 1.220 to make it even. And that changed to 1.2125, that's fine. So that's actually all you have to do. For your very basic overclocking, you're done with the settings in the BIOS. So we're going to hit the X up here, and it's going to tell you that, do you want to save this? And it's telling me everything that has changed. I've moved from auto to a ratio of 39. I've turned off core performance boost. I've upped the voltage from what it said was 1.208, but we saw it bouncing up to 1.216 to 1.2125, and cool and quiet has gone from enabled to disabled. So I'm going to hit yes, and then we're going to boot into Windows, hopefully. It's a fairly conservative overclock, but I also didn't give it any voltage increases, so it may not even boot into Windows. We'll see. Because remember that while the turbo boost or the XFR on AMD's side, while that may boost to frequencies that are at or above the 3.9 gigahertz, that's not every core. Every core is not running at 3.9, so, and every core is going to be different. It's going to have a different stability limit depending on how stable the core is at given frequencies and voltages. So even though one or two cores may run at 3.9, once you have every core at 3.9, you may notice stability problem. Okay, so if I go to device specifications, processor, AMD Ryzen 3 2200G at 3.9 gigahertz. Great, so that's working. Let's go to core temp. So now we're sitting at 30 degrees, 29, 28. So we haven't actually seen an increase in idle temperatures. That's great. Let's open up Cinebench and see if it'll run through. All right, so remember our last score, it didn't save because Cinebench gives me an error creating file that I haven't tracked down why it's doing that on this computer. That's fine, doesn't matter. I wrote it down. 561. So if it runs, let's see what we get. Remember our max last time was 49 degrees Celsius. We're already up to, uh-oh, that's a freeze. That is a freeze. Okay, so Cinebench is not the end-all be-all for stability tests. However, it is a very quick and dirty way to see, is my processor in general stable in most workloads? If you want to see if it's truly stable, you want to do something like Prime 95 or IDA 64, and you want to run those for a good 20 or 30 minutes. Let the processor really heat up and get to its maximum temperature given the cooling that you have available to it. And if it can do that, then you should be pretty much 100% stable. Obviously, some people might go so far as to say you need to be 24/7 Prime 95 stable. That's a bit much. Running Prime 95 on your computer for 24 hours is simulating a workload that you're basically never going to have. So I think that's usually going a little too far. I think you can that restricts your overclocking pretty severely. So what we do now is we bounce the box or restart, essentially reset, power off, power back on, and we're going to need to give it some voltage. So I will do that, and then we will be right back. Una momenta, por favor. All right, so we're back here in the BIOS, and we're going to go over to OC settings, and we're going to just scroll right down here. So obviously, it booted into Windows at 3.9, which means that it is pretty close to stable. Once you can boot into Windows, You're pretty close. Then it's about tweaking the voltage. You probably will not have to come down on the ratio in order to get things stable. You're just going to need to bump up the voltage a little more, unless you're already at the top end of the voltage. We're nowhere close. I think these Ryzen 3s, you can probably go up to 1.45, maybe even 1.5, depending on the cooling you have available. I have a Hyper 212 Evo, which is one of the higher end air coolers you can get. And so that means that I can feel pretty safe going up into the 1.35, 1.4 range and the voltage on this, as long as temps stay in reasonable areas. So let's just bump it up to 1.25. That's a fairly large jump from 1.2125, but it should be fine from a temperature standpoint. And that's the only change we're going to make. I'm just going to go ahead and exit. Now keep in mind, as I said, one of the negatives of overclocking is voltages can erode pathways in processors over time if the voltages are too high. And that's only a problem at ridiculously high levels of voltage. Well, I didn't do anything, so I know the username and password is incorrect. I didn't type anything. At reasonable levels of voltage, and you can Google, what you're going to want to do is just Google the name of your processor, the model, make and model of your processor, and safe voltage. And there is a 99.9999% repeating chance that someone has listed the safe voltage levels that the manufacturer has come out with, or that they've experimented with somewhere on the internet you can find, and just play with those. You don't have to go up to the max immediately either. You don't want to do that because the max voltage is going to give you a lot of extra temperature. The more volts you put into a processor, the higher the temperatures. Guaranteed. All day, every day, that is going to happen. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to fire up core temp. Now remember, we've given it more voltage now. We're still at the 29C at idle. That's good. But I think you'll find that our load temperatures are going to have risen possibly fairly significantly. 4 or 5 degrees Celsius at least, I would think, given the voltage increase we gave it. So we're going to hit run, and we're going to see if it locks up. So we're already up to 43 degrees Celsius, 44. Still running though, still good there. 46. Remember, 49 was our high before at a 561 Cinebench score. We're already up to 46, 47. I think 49 is going to come and go long before we get to the end of this test. Now, I do have the fans for the Hyper 212 plugged into the CPU fan ports on the motherboard, so as temperatures ramp up, the fans are also going to ramp up. I'm not going to give it static fan speeds. For testing purposes, for benchmarking purposes, as far as temperature goes, that would probably actually be a better idea to give it a static fan speed. That way we could see temperature curves with the same fan speeds. However, I'm not going to bother doing that. As temp goes up, they'll ramp up, and it will mess with the temps somewhat. I may be incorrect here. We're still at 47C. We may finish not even hitting 49. Yeah, a max of 48 with a score of 581. So that was at 3.9 gigahertz. We came up 20 points in Cinebench, and we actually went down 1 degree Celsius, which is an interesting result. So now what we're going to do is we're going to do the fine tweaking. We're going to go up very slightly in ratio and voltage until we hit the maximum. So I'm going to close this. I'm going to reboot back in the BIOS, and I'll see you on the other side. So we're back in the BIOS, and I'm just going to go here, and we're going to say some people like to make small jumps, increment up slowly, so that when you hit that first unstable jump, you can then back off one small increment, and you're safe right there. I like to make large jumps and then back off slowly from those large jumps. Either way is fine. Both of them work the same, and I don't think either one of them has a real advantage over the other. It's just I kind of like to do the large jumps, so I'm not sitting here all day trying out a bunch of different stuff. But it's fine either way. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put 42 in here, and I actually have not overclocked this processor yet, so I'm not sure what it's capable of. We are both learning this live and in living color. What I am also going to do is I'm going to go ahead and put in 1.275. I'm gonna give it a little extra voltage boost because we did come up 300 megahertz. Yep, that should be fine. And temps were still well under the TJ Max, even under Cinebench load, so a little extra voltage is not going to hurt anything. Okay, so interestingly enough, it actually boot looped on me there and couldn't even get back into the BIOS for a hot second. So obviously 4.2 was a little gaudy, and actually 4.2 is on these Ryzen chips is pretty rare. You have to have a fairly decent lottery winner in order to hit 4.2. Even on the second gen chips, we're looking at the 4.2 to 4.4 gigahertz range being pretty standard as the top end that these chips are going to hit. And this Ryzen 3 is the second gen. It's the Ryzen Plus processor, so higher frequencies are not unheard of, but 4.2 is still a pretty good win. So what I'm going to do though is I'm just going to bump up the voltage first. I think that this chip should be able to hit 4.2. So let's just bump up the voltage and let's go to 1.35. Why not? So I'm going to hit the X and CPU core voltage from 1.275 to 1.35. Yes. And let's see if it even boots. Posts, gets to Windows, all of the above. All of those would be great. It's not a good start. No signal. And it looks like it was just cycling. No. Nope. It boot looped again. Or rather, it's not posting at all again. No, it does not like 4.2. I don't know that 4.2 might be too much to ask regardless of the voltage we're giving it. It's not even posting at 4.2. It's not a great sign. If we could get enough voltage to just post, then we're going to need even more to get into Windows. And once we get into Windows, we're going to need even more to get through a Cinebench run. And then you're talking about even more to get a fully stable overclock. So I think we probably need to back it down to 4.1. So let me hard boot it here and get back into the BIOS, and then we'll back it down and we'll see how that works. So I'll be back in just a second. Okay, so we're back in the BIOS here. We're gonna go back to the OC, and we're gonna drop down to 4,100 megahertz or 4.1 gigahertz. And we're gonna leave it on 1.35 just to see what happens. I think that 4.2 may just be the hard limit of the processor in question, and that once we back it down, that 100 megahertz bump down will actually make it considerably more stable. So there's probably, if you're talking about a graph, so imagine this is a graph here on the screen. So if you're imagining as you go up in speed, you go up in voltage. So it's like a ramp. So speed up, voltage up to make the processor stable. At certain frequencies on AMD chips, like once you get to that 4.2 range, the needed voltage to make it stable again at those frequencies there's large ladders. So it's like, so I imagine the 4.2 on this chip, we hit it and there's this ladder of voltage required to make it stable all the way up here. So let's see what 4.1 does. 4.1 might post at those voltages, and hopefully it will, go into Windows. So far, so good. Post is done. Windows is booting. Still spinning. It's a good sign. Still spinning. Oh, stop spinning. It's not necessarily frozen. No, now I think it's frozen. I didn't want to be pessimistic, but yeah, it is frozen. But that's good. That's a much better result. So now we can pop the voltage up. I think maybe 1.4. 1.4 maybe, and we might have a winner. So let me get back in the BIOS, and then I'll see you on that side. All right, so we're back in the BIOS. Let's go down here. We're going to make a fairly large jump all the way up to 1.4. Voltage wise, we're nearing the upper limit of what you'd feel safe with, certainly with air cooling, but I just want to get into Windows, maybe get through a Cinebench run and see how it works. Also, I am aware that that these AMD chips actually see much higher performance improvements from RAM overclocking than they do from CPU speed, core speed, but this video is about CPU overclocking in particular. There will be another video on RAM overclocking where we'll go over that, and then you'll also see the performance jumps that you can get from RAM overclocking, especially on these AMD chips, these Ryzen chips. So let's get old core temp fired up. 40C. See, now we're sitting considerably higher idle temperatures, 37C. So we've gone up almost 10C idle. It's dropping down, but 39C. Any hint of activity and the temp jumps quickly. So when I even just fire up Cinebench, you're probably going to see the temperature jump. Well, you couldn't see it. All right, so we were at 3.9 gigahertz. We had a 581 Cinebench at 48 degrees Celsius, which was a 20 Cinebench improvement from the stock scores and a 1 degree lower temperature, oddly enough. But we're going to hit run. Might not even make it through this run. We'll see. Look at that temp now. Look at that. 54C right off the bat. 48C was our previous max, and we're above that as soon as the test starts. So you can now see what extra voltage does for your temps. So do keep in mind that if you're going to increase voltage on your setup, make sure that you have a cooler that can handle it, be that air or even more preferably water. Or, you know, liquid nitrogen if you want to go that route. That's certainly one way to do it. That will keep temps down. So as you see Cinebench run here, we're getting to 56C. It seems to have hit a thermal equilibrium because the max was actually 57C and we're now at 56. So this is probably about where the cooler is going to keep this processor even under strenuous workloads over long periods of time. If I were to run IDA64, which does unrealistic amounts of workload just to up temps, it would probably go up higher than this. We might see something in the 60C range. All right, so 610, that's impressive. Well, that's actually a 30 Cinebench jump with only another 200 megahertz. So that's 4.1 gigahertz, 610 Cinebench score at a maximum of 57 degrees Celsius. So now what you can do, just to make sure, so let's say basically I can't even boot at 4.2. At 4.1 I can run through Cinebench. So I'm going to say that 4.2 is basically not possible for this processor. I don't want to give it enough voltage to make it stable, and even then I wouldn't be confident that it's really stable. And I don't think the 100 megahertz is going to make enough difference to warrant the extra voltage I'm going to have to give it to get there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to close Cinebench. It's not going to save. I already know that. That's fine. I'm going to open up IDA64 Extreme, and I'm going to go to the Tools and System Stability Test. So Cinebench is completely free, by the way. You can download it. Just Google Cinebench. You can download it from their website. Completely free to use for as long as you want. IDA64 is free for the first 14 days. You can pay for it. I don't remember. I paid for it a long time ago. I don't think it's that expensive. You know, less than 30 bucks certainly. And you get, you know, this stress testing functionality. Now we don't want to stress memory. All we care about here is the processor, and we don't need core temp because IDA64 monitors temperatures all on its own. Temps up here, CPU load down here. You hit the start button in the bottom left, and it goes. CPU load quickly pings at 100%, and temps start rising. So CPU is at 58. Now, IDA is not familiar with the processor that I'm using because I don't have the newest version of IDA64, so it's not displaying a core-by-core temperature. We're just getting the total package temp. And as I said before, Cinebench is not pinging at 100% load like IDA does. So, and again, IDA is an unrealistic simulation of workload. So it's almost like running Furmark on a GPU. Oh, yep. So we're not IDA64 stable. Now this is where you get the final little stability tweaks that are going to take you the rest of the way there. What you would do now is you would go back into the BIOS and you would add a tiny bit of voltage at a time until you can get through 20 or 30 minutes of IDA64. And once you're there and temps are still under control, then you can call it a fully stable overclock. and you are essentially done overclocking your CPU. And again, this was with a Ryzen 3, but this same methodology applies to any CPU on any motherboard, going all the way back to, you know, your Pentium 1s and Pentium 2s if you wanted to. It's the same general idea, although unlocked multipliers versus locked multipliers is a whole different thing. I'm not going to go into that. If your CPU does not have an unlocked multiplier, you essentially cannot overclock it. There are ways around that, but it's not really worth it. You're going to get very slight increases on locked CPUs. That's mostly not worth it. So regardless, so that's it for overclocking. Like I said, this applies to pretty much any CPU motherboard combo you want to use, as long as it's an unlocked CPU that supports ratio overclocking. So you can follow me on Twitter at ZaxbyTweet. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and share. If you want to enter the giveaway for the GTX 950, hit the description down below. I know this video actually came out on Monday instead of Sunday. I think it's going to, today's Monday. I hope it's going to come out tonight. I still got to edit it, but that shouldn't take overly long, and upload and etc. etc. But regardless, so hit the description down there for any relevant information, such as how to enter the giveaway and playlists for hardware help episodes. The next episode of Hardware Help will be on RAM overclocking. So if that's something that interests you, if you want to combine the two, if you want to do CPU and RAM, and you usually do, then make sure to look for that. Also, when you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell beside the subscribe button, and that will alert you to every time a video comes out, as opposed to whenever YouTube feels like telling you. Thanks for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, and share, and I will see you guys next time. Bye-bye.